A peaceful morning in the countryside took a sudden turn when a farmer surveying his land stumbled upon something unusual. In a relatively remote area, overgrown with bushes and uneven terrain, his attention was drawn to suspicious shapes resembling a human skeleton. The police quickly secured the area, ensuring that no evidence would be disturbed. Forensic specialists, well-versed in the painstaking process of exhumation, arrived promptly to examine the scene with meticulous care. When the official announcement confirmed that the remains belonged to Kelly Dwyer, the weight of that revelation hit the local community hard. In a place where everyone knew each other, the loss of Kelly sent ripples of shock and sorrow through the hearts of those who had known her. Dear viewers, remember to like, comment on the video, and subscribe to the channel to stay updated with our new content. Your support is crucial. This real documentary will delve into Kelly Dwyer was born in 1986 and grew up in a smaller community just outside Milwaukee, Wisconsin. From an early age, she displayed a friendly, outgoing personality and a genuine curiosity about the world around her. Her family and close friends recall her as someone who could light up a room with her warm smile and infectious laughter. After high school, she briefly contemplated moving out of state for college. Ultimately, she chose to remain closer to home, hoping to balance her studies with work. As she entered her 20s, Kelly's natural sociability led her to discover a passion for customer-focused jobs, thriving in retail and service industries. With an eye for style, she enjoyed helping people feel confident about their appearance. Her friends often described her as someone who could strike up a conversation with anyone, making them feel at ease. By the time she turned 27, Kelly had settled into a modest apartment in Milwaukee. Although she continued to work in retail, most recently at a boutique specializing in contemporary clothing, she still harbored dreams of furthering her education, or perhaps starting her own small business one day. Her coworkers and managers appreciated her reliability and warm demeanor with customers. In mid-2013, Kelly began dating Chris Sacco, a man who lived in a more upscale section of downtown Milwaukee. While little is known publicly about the early stages of their relationship, those who observed them together recalled that Kelly seemed genuinely happy, enjoying the excitement of dating someone whose lifestyle was a bit more fast-paced than her own. On October 5, 2013, Kelly finished her shift at the boutique. That Friday night, she clocked out shortly after 8:00 p.m., waved goodbye to a coworker, locking up behind her, and stepped into the cool autumn air, sending a quick text to a friend. In her message, she mentioned spending the evening at her boyfriend's place. There was no sign of apprehension in her last texts. However, over the next few days, Kelly's normally responsive phone fell silent. This silence sparked the first stirrings of concern among her friends. Initially, they tried to quell their worries, reminding each other that Kelly was known for her spontaneity. After all, she had embarked on short hiking trips before with minimal notice. Yet, as one day of silence stretched into two, and she missed a scheduled weekend shift, something she was never known to skip, alarm bells began to ring. Her mother, living in another part of Wisconsin, felt an indescribable dread wash over her as repeated calls and texts to Kelly's phone went unanswered. By Monday, Kelly's manager at the boutique pointed out that she had failed to show up for 2 consecutive days, an unusual occurrence for the typically punctual employee. It was an alarming sign when Kelly Dwyer failed to show up for work, not once, but for 2 consecutive days. This behavior was utterly out of character for the usually punctual and dedicated employee. With mounting concern, Kelly's mother and a close friend rushed to the local police station, determined to file a missing person report. As officers gathered information, they adhered to standard protocol concerning missing adults. They reminded everyone that Kelly might have left of her own accord, suggesting they allow more time for her to return. But those who knew her best sensed something was profoundly wrong. Kelly Dwyer was known for her vibrant social life and adventurous spirit, yet she was equally devoted to her friends and her career. Within days of her mysterious disappearance, concern rippled beyond her immediate circle, drawing in coworkers, casual acquaintances, and local businesses who shared in the growing alarm. The boutique where Kelly worked sprang into action, printing missing person flyers featuring her radiant smile captured in a floral sundress. Soon, these flyers adorned telephone poles, community boards at coffee shops, and the windows of local diners, urging anyone with information to step forward. Each flyer revealed that Kelly had last been seen entering a downtown apartment building in the early hours of October 5th. This detail was critical, as it marked the last known sighting of her and set the stage for the unfolding mystery. Captured by a security camera, Kelly was seen entering the building, yet the footage offered no evidence of her departure. The absence of any recorded exit ignited speculation. Had she slipped out another way, or had something darker transpired behind those closed doors? Local news stations quickly picked up the story, sending reporters to stand outside the apartment building, microphones in hand, delivering somber updates to an anxious public. On the evening news, grainy clips displayed Kelly stepping inside, dressed in jeans and a light jacket, her small purse in hand, an ordinary scene that belied the extraordinary circumstances now engulfing her life. The haunting question lingered: what happened to her once she crossed that threshold? As days turned into weeks, the tension escalated with each unfruitful lead, prompting Kelly's friends to form search parties. They scoured local bars, parks, and overlooked corners of Milwaukee, desperately searching for any clue that could illuminate her whereabouts. Meanwhile, the police intensified their investigation, commencing interviews with her boyfriend. Chris Zacco, the last known person to see Kelly alive, became a focal point of scrutiny. His account, relayed to friends and investigators, claimed she left his apartment early that morning, a detail that did little to clarify her fate. Yet, without video evidence of her departure or a solid timeline of text messages from her phone, validating his story proved challenging. Investigators delved into phone records, bank statements, and social media activity, searching for any digital trail. Despite their exhaustive efforts, nothing conclusive emerged. Kelly's accounts showed no suspicious activity, and her phone's final location pinged near the downtown area, a fact that aligned unsettlingly with what little was known. As hours turned into days, a heavy sense of dread descended upon her family. By the end of the second week, local newspapers splashed her story across their front pages with ominous headlines. "Missing in Milwaukee, where is Kelly Dwyer?" As the search persisted, unverified rumors began to swirl. Someone claimed to have spotted Kelly at a gas station late one night, 2 counties away. Another insisted she had ventured out of state with an unidentified companion. Yet, each new lead fizzled without resolution. The police publicly maintained that their investigation was ongoing, urging anyone who might have been in the downtown area at the time of her disappearance to come forward with any information, however small. Despite the mounting attention, the case seemed to stagnate, generating as many questions as fears. Nonetheless, the neighborhood surrounding Chris Zacco's residence remained a hotbed of speculation and concern, a place where whispers of Kelly's fate echoed in the dark. The management of the building complied with police requests, providing whatever surveillance footage they possessed. However, this footage offered no clear answers. As the city braced for a brutal winter, with temperatures plummeting, a palpable sense of despair settled over the community. The question loomed large and unanswered: how could a vibrant young woman, beloved by many, simply vanish without a trace in a location equipped with surveillance cameras? Law enforcement's priority was to establish that Kelly Dwyer's disappearance was. Indeed, her behavior was out of character. This uncertainty only fueled investigators' determination to dig deeper, convinced that the last person to see Kelly, along with the location where she was last known to be, held vital answers. In the initial stages of the investigation, officers interviewed Chris Zacco multiple times, meticulously noting any inconsistencies or gaps in his account. He recounted a routine evening. According to Chris, Kelly arrived, they exchanged pleasantries, and while he couldn't recall the specifics, they might have ordered takeout. They settled in to watch some television before retiring for the night. He insisted that nothing about Kelly's demeanor raised any alarms. There were no arguments, no signs of distress. He claimed that after a few hours of sleep, Kelly mentioned she was heading home, and that was the last time he laid eyes on her. Detectives diligently recorded his version of events. Simultaneously, they sought a warrant to search his apartment for any physical evidence that could clarify whether Kelly had truly departed on her own. Initially, the search revealed no obvious signs of a struggle, no blood, no disarray that might suggest violence. However, the police seized certain items for further analysis, including bedding and electronics, hoping forensic testing would uncover a trace of Kelly or at least validate or refute Chris's timeline. While these procedures were standard in cases of missing persons with potential foul play, the uncertainty surrounding Kelly's disappearance morphed into acute dread for her loved ones. Each passing day without her amplified fears that she had come to harm. A handful of neighbors recalled hearing muffled voices or the sound of a door slamming late that night, but none could definitively link those noises to Kelly, and certainly no one had witnessed her leaving. As the case unfolded, it grew more perplexing. The situation became even more confounding when investigators learned that the building was outfitted with multiple cameras, yet none had captured Kelly's exit. They began to ponder whether a blind spot, a service entrance, or perhaps a timestamp error might have caused them to miss critical footage. Despite sifting through hours of recordings, they found no conclusive evidence that Kelly had ever stepped beyond the lobby. The tension escalated when, during a later search of Chris's apartment, prompted by what investigators cautiously termed additional probable cause, police uncovered evidence that shifted the investigation into disturbing territory: intimate videos. These videos were discovered on multiple electronic devices. Word of this shocking find leaked before any formal charges were filed, igniting public fears that Chris might be capable of far darker deeds than anyone had initially imagined. Once these allegations hit the media, Chris's name became irrevocably linked to two terrifying notions: a missing girlfriend and the possession of illegal sexual content. The city's discourse regarding Kelly's disappearance began to intertwine with revulsion at the possibility that Chris's private life concealed something far more sinister than a mere relationship gone awry. Detectives faced the challenge of reconciling these new revelations with their original mission to find Kelly, or at least comprehend the circumstances of her disappearance. Although the pornography charges were considered separate, the very fact that Chris had hidden such material raised significant red flags about his credibility and moral integrity. Investigators delved into his emails, browser history, and messaging applications. While the pornography charges against Chris Sacco were distinct from the murder case, the discovery of such material raised significant red flags regarding his credibility and moral character. Investigators meticulously combed through his emails, browser history, and messaging applications, seeking any clues that could unravel the truth behind Kelly's disappearance and death. Law enforcement diligently searched for mentions of Kelly or any potential communications with third parties that might unveil her whereabouts. They sought contradictory statements that could be pivotal if the case ever went to trial. Authorities called in acquaintances, co-workers, and anyone who had socialized with Chris and Kelly, hoping to discern any telling shifts in Chris's behavior. Was he known to be controlling? It became apparent that Chris was prone to jealousy, often engaging in risk-taking activities that could spiral into dangerous scenarios. Some acquaintances noted that Chris had bragged about having access to illegal substances, a revelation that, while not uncommon in certain circles, raised significant concerns. A fresh angle emerged when, during yet another round of searches and interviews, police confirmed that Chris faced potential drug charges after paraphernalia was discovered in his possession. Authorities seized quantities of illegal substances, and the drug-related charges were enough to entangle him further in the legal system. He soon found himself in custody, facing bail hearings that the prosecution argued should be stringent. Given the severity of his offenses, police quietly intensified their direct investigative work surrounding Kelly's last known hours. They meticulously scrutinized phone logs and location data to determine whether Chris's device had traveled to any unusual locations. Investigators dispatched specialized teams to comb through areas he might have frequented, from remote fields and wooded patches outside the city to industrial zones closer to downtown. Authorities were determined to uncover any trace that might link Chris Sacco to Kelly Dwyer's disappearance. Local news bulletins were inundated with calls from citizens convinced they had leads. Yet most reports turned out to be dead ends. One caller claimed to have spotted Kelly at a highway rest stop, while another believed they recognized her from a blurred photograph circulating on social media. The police diligently pursued each tip, only to be met with the same disquieting silence: no confirmed sightings, and no new evidence to illuminate the case. The only suspect remained uncooperative, attributing everything to coincidence or a series of unfortunate misunderstandings. As the year drew to a close, the district attorney's office had already filed multiple counts against Chris for drug-related offenses. Prosecutors conferred with detectives behind closed doors, considering the possibility of leveraging these charges to pressure Chris into revealing what he knew about Kelly's fate. Yet any hopes that legal pressure would cause him to crack were quickly dashed. Chris steadfastly maintained his innocence regarding Kelly's disappearance. His lawyers, acutely aware of the implications of any statement about Kelly, advised him to remain tight-lipped on the matter. As Chris's court dates for the drug-related charges loomed, the Milwaukee Police Department pressed on with their investigation. Investigators sought to fill every gap in the timeline, canvassing neighbors, rechecking parking garage footage, and repeatedly appealing for fresh leads. In late spring of 2015, roughly a year and a half after Kelly Dwyer's disappearance, new information began to surface. The Milwaukee community was jolted from a tense, sorrowful waiting game into a fresh wave of shock when news broke that human remains had been discovered in a rural stretch of Jefferson County, about an hour's drive from the city. Investigators converged on the site, driven by the haunting question that had plagued the community for far too long. The initial details trickled out cautiously, revealing a property owner in a remote expanse of farmland who had made a grim discovery. Investigators had stumbled upon what appeared to be skeletal remains, partially obscured by brush and uneven terrain. The land was dotted with patches of tall grass and scattered stands of trees, evoking a heartbreaking thought of how long those remains might have been there, lying undiscovered while Kelly Dwyer's family and friends clung to a fading hope. Law enforcement acted swiftly, cordoning off the area and dispatching forensic specialists who were well versed in the meticulous process of exhuming evidence from outdoor scenes. They understood that any minor detail, a stray fiber, a specific brand of duct tape, or a personal item could reveal critical insights into the cause of death, or, at the very least, confirm the identity of the person who had been left there in such a tragic manner. Though the authorities did not confirm it publicly right away, rumors spread almost instantly that this anonymous figure was, in fact, Kelly Dwyer. For many who had followed her case since October 2013, there was an almost fatalistic sense that the timing of this discovery carried significant weight. The location and condition of the remains made it unlikely they belonged to anyone else. Nevertheless, the official identification required methodical comparisons of dental records and potentially DNA samples. This process demanded not only scientific precision, but also patience from a family desperate for answers. News crews descended on the scene, capturing the somber sight of uniformed officers moving slowly across the property with handheld search equipment. Expressionless and grim in the face of what they might uncover, the moment the final word came that the remains did indeed belong to Kelly Dwyer landed like a sledgehammer on a community that had, in many ways, become emotionally invested in her plight. On one hand, the discovery brought a sliver of relief to those who had feared she would remain missing forever, her loved ones deprived of the closure that can only come when a body is found and laid to rest. On the other hand, this moment carried the crushing heartbreak of confirmation. There would be no miraculous reappearance, no joyous reunion, just the stark truth that Kelly had died, either violently or unexpectedly. And that someone, presumably, had gone to great lengths to conceal her body. Official statements from the Milwaukee Police Department were terse but resolute. They regarded the discovery as a crucial turning point in the investigation. They were certain that forensic evidence would provide vital clues about the manner and time of Kelly's death. Almost immediately, attention swung back to Chris Zacco, her boyfriend at the time of her disappearance. The question now became whether the physical evidence recovered in Jefferson County might finally connect him to her death beyond mere circumstantial inferences. Although the police remained tight-lipped about any specifics, local journalists reported that certain personal effects found near or with Kelly's remains had been bagged and sent off to the state crime lab for DNA testing, a crucial step that investigators hoped would link Chris to the disposal site. Conversely, this could open up the possibility that someone else might have been involved. Complicating matters was the advanced state of decomposition. Kelly had been missing for over a year and a half, and the frigid Wisconsin winters and humid summers could wreak havoc on forensic details. Identifying a cause of death, whether strangulation, blunt force trauma, or an overdose, would be far trickier now than it might have been had her remains been discovered earlier. In the sweltering heat of summer, the humid air threatened to compromise vital forensic details. The task of identifying Kelly's cause of death, be it strangulation, blunt force trauma, or an overdose, would prove significantly more challenging now, as the window of opportunity for accurate analysis had closed with the delay. The involvement of seasoned forensic pathologists provided a glimmer of hope. They believed certain critical markers could still exist, whether in the condition of Kelly's bones, residual tissue, or the soil samples surrounding the site. With each passing day, more evidence began to emerge. Despite this, official statements provided the public with nothing but vague updates. Authorities would assert, "We continue to analyze new data," or "We have reason to believe that additional parties may have information." This left the community grappling with unanswered questions about how someone could have transported her remains to such a remote location. People speculated whether this suggested a level of premeditation or a frantic panic, and inevitably pondered if someone else might be involved in the tragic events. Against this tumultuous backdrop, Kelly's mother made the brave decision to speak publicly. Accompanied by friends holding cherished photographs of Kelly in brighter days, she conveyed a deep sorrow and an unwavering determination to see justice served. She insisted that her daughter's life should not be defined solely by its heartbreaking conclusion. Instead, she wanted Kelly to be remembered for the warmth and kindness she had embodied during her 27 years. Mourners from all walks of life, many of whom had never met Kelly, came together to light candles in her honor. The tragic discovery of Kelly's remains also reignited the Milwaukee Police Department's focus on Chris Sacco. Their strategy was clear. If they could connect even the smallest piece of physical evidence from the crime scene, be it a fiber, tire track, or hair sample to Chris, they would be much closer to building a solid homicide case rather than relying on mere suspicion. Simultaneously, prosecutors from the district attorney's office seized the opportunity to revisit discussions about potential plea deals. They theorized that if Chris faced the threat of a homicide charge, he might be compelled to divulge critical information in exchange for leniency on lesser charges. The stakes were high, and the possibility of a plea deal loomed large as authorities aimed to uncover the truth buried beneath layers of deception. The evidence pointed squarely at Chris Sacco. As rumors swirled, whispers suggested that his defense team might argue Kelly had died due to drug use or some unfortunate mishap, claiming he had simply panicked. However, the implications were far more sinister. Without concrete forensic evidence indicating an overdose or any note from Kelly acknowledging a plan to engage in risky behavior, such a defense seemed speculative at best. Public skepticism was palpable. Many believed that if Kelly's death had been purely accidental, there would have been no motive to conceal her body in a desolate area and maintain silence for over a year. Yet, these swirling theories only highlighted the complexities investigators faced. In high-profile cases, the boundary between diligent fact-finding and rampant rumor can become obscured. The Milwaukee Police Department understood all too well that incomplete public statements could give rise to wild conjectures that clouded the truth. Rather than clarifying matters, the discovery site became a bustling hub of activity. Forensic anthropologists meticulously sifted through dirt and debris, documenting every detail with precision. Collecting samples for advanced laboratory analysis, this painstaking process extended over several days. Even after the remains were removed, further sweeps of the surrounding terrain continued, driven by an urgency to ensure nothing was overlooked. In a courtroom, even the most seemingly trivial item, such as a scrap of clothing or a piece of jewelry, could carry monumental significance. Local residents reported seeing police cars stationed by the road for weeks, and many admitted that the entire ordeal had deeply unsettled them. The emotional toll of this ongoing tragedy was incalculable. For months, Kelly's family had balanced precariously between hope and despair. However, the final confirmation of her identity through dental records forced them to confront a harsh reality they had tried to delay. Meanwhile, detectives diligently pursued every angle, acutely aware that the window for new leads was narrowing. While they withheld specific details, authorities hinted at having gathered promising leads from the scene. Milwaukee braced itself for the next phase of the trial, a moment everyone hoped would bring real accountability for those responsible for Kelly's death and the subsequent disposal of her body. After countless false starts, unconfirmed rumors, and heartbreaking dead ends, the city held its breath. The community understood that the resolution might be as brutal as the events leading up to it, yet it was a resolution they deemed necessary. For Kelly's family and friends to find any semblance of peace amidst this unimaginable tragedy, the prosecution's case in the ensuing months revolved around the assertion that Chris had both motive and opportunity to harm Kelly. They contended that Kelly died in Chris's downtown apartment after a night of illicit substance use. According to their theory, the situation turned fatal either due to an overdose he failed to report or an act of violence that he attempted to cover up. Furthermore, they argued that even if her death was accidental, Chris's actions in concealing her body in a remote rural location showcased a consciousness of guilt and a desperate attempt to evade responsibility. However, before formal charges could be filed, the district attorney's office insisted on a thorough examination of every piece of evidence that could withstand scrutiny in court: phone records indicating Chris's location at suspicious times, his inconsistent statements regarding when Kelly supposedly left his apartment, and any forensic evidence, such as fibers from her clothing or traces of her DNA, that might have been transferred to his vehicle. Collaborating closely with detectives, the district attorney meticulously combed through hours of police interviews, searching for even the slightest contradictions in Chris's narrative. They believed that a pattern of deceit could prove as damaging as any physical evidence. The pre-trial hearings offered a glimpse of the evidence being prepared against Chris. Prosecutors aimed to convince the jury that he bore responsibility for Kelly's death, much of which hinged on a damning digital trail. Location data revealed that Chris's phone left the city in the hours following Kelly's last known sighting. It traveled towards Jefferson County, though gaps in the data suggested his device may have been turned off or out of service range. Chris claimed he made a 160-mile round trip to buy a half-pound block of cheese for his girlfriend's parents. However, investigators suspected his true intention was to dispose of Kelly's body somewhere in rural Wisconsin. Prosecutors hinted at evidence such as text messages and internet searches that suggested Chris was either planning or covering up a fatal incident. During the initial proceedings, Chris's defense attorney objected to the inclusion of these materials, labeling them speculative and claiming they were obtained without proper warrants. The defense's position was unequivocal from the start. They would accept no responsibility for Kelly's death unless the prosecution could provide irrefutable evidence that Chris himself caused her harm. They argued that Kelly's use of illicit substances was more extensive than her friends realized, implying she could have overdosed at his apartment. The defense argued that Chris Sacco panicked in the wake of Kelly Dwyer's death, opting to hide her body instead of calling for help. They conceded that this act was callous, yet maintained it did not amount to first-degree reckless homicide. This argument forced the prosecution to navigate a precarious path. On one side, they could not entirely dismiss the possibility of an overdose, as forensic experts, due to the advanced decomposition of Kelly's remains, could not definitively conclude whether strangulation, blunt force trauma, or another cause led to her death. Conversely, Chris's subsequent behavior raised eyebrows. Allegations of him transporting Kelly's body, discarding her personal items, and lying to the police painted a picture of guilt in the eyes of many. Observers in the courtroom noted Chris often appeared subdued, stealing glances at Kelly's mother while otherwise betraying little emotion. As the courtroom buzzed with anticipation, the prosecution unveiled a chilling narrative. Chris Sacco and Kelly Dwyer had been engaging in the use of prohibited substances, an activity that Chris frequently indulged in and sometimes pressured Kelly to join. Under the influence, Kelly lost consciousness. Rather than seeking urgent medical help, Chris allegedly hesitated, possibly out of fear of police involvement in his drug dealings or following a violent confrontation between them. Prosecutors contended that Chris's failure to call for assistance, coupled with his deliberate concealment of Kelly's body, indicated a conscious awareness of his role in her death. They referenced phone logs that placed him in Jefferson County around the exact moment Kelly's phone ceased all transmissions. Amidst this unfolding drama, forensic pathologists testified. They admitted that while they could not isolate a singular fatal injury, the condition of Kelly's remains suggested a hastily buried body. Such an act, they insisted, was not something an innocent bystander would orchestrate. On the other side of the courtroom, Chris's defense clung firmly to the overdose theory. They highlighted the uncertainties within the autopsy findings, arguing that the inability to definitively prove a cause of death equated to an inability to prove homicide. They portrayed Chris as a man gripped by panic and moral cowardice, yet not as a cold-blooded killer. During cross-examinations, defense attorneys pressed forensic experts to acknowledge the limitations of their conclusions. They pointed out that without clear evidence of strangulation or physical assault, it was impossible to assert that Chris had committed any crime. The defense argued there was no evidence linking Chris to police involvement in his drug dealings, nor was there proof of any violent confrontation between him and Kelly. Prosecutors maintained, however, that Chris's actions demonstrated a clear awareness of his culpability in her death. Hints of Chris's reckless behavior surfaced as well. Prosecutors continued to reference phone logs that placed him in Jefferson County around the time Kelly's phone went silent. The forensic pathologist's testimony painted a grim picture, suggesting a clandestine burial orchestrated by someone with knowledge of the scenario. The pathologists reiterated their stance, emphasizing that while no single lethal injury could be identified, the condition of Kelly's remains indicated foul play that no innocent person would arrange. Yet Chris's defense remained steadfast. They continued to advocate for the overdose narrative, leveraging the uncertainties in the autopsy findings. They argued that without a confirmed cause of death, homicide could not be established. Chris was portrayed as a man engulfed by panic, but not a calculated murderer. In cross-examinations, the defense pressed forensic experts to concede the limitations of their findings, asserting that the absence of definitive signs of strangulation or assault rendered the claim of Chris's guilt speculative at best. The defense also targeted police investigators, suggesting that the department may have prematurely concluded its investigation into Kelly's disappearance. They questioned whether authorities had fully considered that Kelly might have left the apartment willingly and encountered harm later, or whether another individual could have found her in a vulnerable state. To outside observers, these arguments often appeared stretched. Yet, within the confines of a criminal trial, where the burden of proof rests heavily on the state to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, even the flimsiest of narratives can cast doubt in the minds of jurors. As the trial unfolded, the prosecution introduced what they deemed the centerpiece of their case, a series of text messages partially recovered by digital forensic specialists, which would soon prove pivotal in the courtroom drama. As the trial unfolded, the prosecution unveiled what they deemed their pivotal piece of evidence, a collection of text messages that had been partially retrieved by digital forensic specialists. This evidence was expected to sway the jury and shine a light on the events leading up to Kelly's tragic fate. In a series of troubling messages, Chris Sacco revealed his frustrations with Kelly Dwyer. He alluded to her unwillingness to match his reckless lifestyle and her hesitance to engage in the use of prohibited substances. One particularly ominous text echoed with foreboding, as Chris confided in a friend that Kelly can't handle what I do. The defense countered by asserting that this statement was merely indicative of typical relationship disputes. More damning, however, were the location pings extracted from Chris's cell phone. These pings unveiled an unusual route meticulously charted by prosecutors. They itemized the approximate times that coincided with the hours following Kelly's final sighting, painting a picture that was difficult to ignore. Prosecutors contended that even if the exact circumstances surrounding Kelly's death were clouded in uncertainty, Chris's subsequent actions spoke volumes. His calculated disposal of her body, coupled with a series of shifting explanations to friends and investigators, all while continuing his life as if nothing had happened, painted a portrait of reckless homicide. The defense retorted, arguing that moral revulsion did not equate to legal culpability. They suggested that if Kelly had indeed overdosed, the act of disposing of her body, while repugnant, did not amount to murder. The courtroom became a battleground of perspectives as each side implored the jury to see through the other's alleged misdirections. Tension hung thick in the air as the jury deliberated, leading to a suspenseful wait for their final verdict. When they finally returned, the atmosphere was charged with an almost palpable weight. News cameras hovered outside the courthouse, capturing every subtle shift and emotional expression from the gathered spectators. Ultimately, the jury rendered their decision, finding Chris Sacco guilty of first-degree manslaughter and concealing a corpse. The verdict washed over the room like a tidal wave, eliciting both relief and sorrow among those present. Kelly's mother, overwhelmed by emotion, wept openly, clutching a small pendant containing her daughter's photograph. Meanwhile, the defense team quietly announced their intention to appeal, citing inconclusive forensic evidence and asserting that prejudicial references to Chris's other charges had skewed the jury's perception. Despite the impending appeal, the reality of the situation was stark. Chris faced a significant prison sentence. During the sentencing phase, prosecutors painted a damning portrait of Chris as a manipulative individual who not only contributed to Kelly's death, but also attempted to erase any trace of her existence. In response, Chris's attorneys pleaded for leniency, arguing that while his choices were misguided, they stemmed from addiction and panic, not from a calculated desire to kill. The presiding judge, however, made it abundantly clear that abandoning someone's body in a secluded field without notifying authorities, especially someone with whom one shared an ostensibly caring relationship, demanded accountability. In the end, in December 2018, Chris Sacco was sentenced to 31 years in prison for the murder of Kelly Dwyer, a grim reminder of the tragic consequences of their intertwined lives. The weight of the loss bore heavily on all involved, reverberating through the courtroom. Ultimately, in December 2018, Chris Sacco was handed a 31-year prison sentence for the murder of Kelly Dwyer, a grim conclusion to a case that had captivated a community and left many seeking answers.